What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Cody here alongside our friend Matt from Inside the Horseshoe podcast. Matt, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. I'm a little excited for this week with free agency coming up. I'm just curious, are we finally going to see Ballard do what he should be doing?
I feel like this is going to be very, very telling for Ballard's future with Indianapolis. If he just sits on his hands again, I mean, we even talked about it. Could we at this point next year be talking about a new GM and a new
True.
regime? I mean, like, obviously it might be a little extreme for some people, but like Irsay is not happy with
Yeah.
how the season ended. We'll just say that. And it seems like from what Irsay has said, right, all chips are in.
Mhm.
Now, still very, very early. Nothing has officially happened yet. Legal tampering is going to happen in the next couple days here. Free agency technically starts on Wednesday. So there's going to be a lot of stuff. And I thought it would be probably a good idea to kind of give our final thoughts on free agency, how we think the Colts should attack it, the positions we think the Colts should attack, and some of the players potentially that could be good fits with Indianapolis. So we got to start, obviously, with the most important position, Matt, in football, the quarterback position. And you kind of look at this free agent class, and there's not a ton of guys here that really are like, wow, eye-popping, guys that you're like, if we sign this guy, he's our future at quarterback for the next 5 to 10 years. Now, there are a few guys potentially that you could trade for that you maybe could make that argument a little bit more. But strictly when it comes down to free agency, what are your thoughts on this quarterback class?
Free agency wise, not great. It seems like the last couple years, the quarterback class hasn't been too bad. Obviously, 2 years ago with Brady and Rivers, that was a really good class. But yeah, this year stinks. There's really nobody there that's going to make you a Super Bowl contender unless, they're going to the right situation like a Mitch Trubisky or Jameis Winston, where they go from maybe a team that wasn't the best for them, like Tampa with Jameis or Chicago with Mitch. They go to another team, they sit for a year or two, and then they become free agents, and then they go to us, let's say, and they turn their career around. I mean, it's happened before, but other than them, there's really nobody. I mean, Teddy Bridgewater is more of that stabilizing quarterback. I know people are talking about Marcus Mariota, but he has injury problems. I think the last time he played more than 5 snaps, ended up getting hurt pretty bad. So, yeah, it's just not that great.
It's kind of honestly, it's a crapshoot right now at the
Yeah.
quarterback position. It's hard to say that, and I think that honestly, Matt, is a reason why the Colts got as much out of Carson Wentz as they did, because the quarterback market is that bad in free
Yeah.
agency and in the draft as well. So there's not a whole lot of guys. Now, personally, I would probably want to go, Jameis Winston number one, since
Mhm.
he is, not former number one overall pick. He obviously the talent is there.
Yeah.
He's got all you're looking for physically from a quarterback. Now, we said the same thing about Carson Wentz, obviously, which was true. There was just some other things, beyond football. Yeah, go back and listen to the videos, read Kiefer's article, all that. We won't get into that, but still, I mean, Jameis Winston's the guy that threw for over 5,000 yards only a couple seasons ago.
Mhm.
And there was a very interesting thing, Matt, on Jameis Winston that I read a couple years ago, the whole 30 for 30 thing, very notorious. People, when they hear Jameis Winston's name, that's automatically where they go to is no because of that season. But
Right.
it's interesting because you look at how complex that system is in an offense, and you're like, man, it's a really tough offense to figure out. And that offense is more, and we saw it with Bruce Arians, it's more of that, deep pass offense. It's less of the, quick check downs, all that kind of stuff like Frank Reich's offense. It's more of that, 5, 6, 7 step drop back, and that's why I think, Andrew Luck got hit as much as he did his rookie years because of that. But all things considered, last year with Jameis Winston, he was actually pretty good. I know he got injured and he was out for most of the season, but in the 7 games he did play, he actually looked not half bad. So I think the question is if the Saints, and this is a question, like if the Saints decide to not retain him, which they still might, would he be the best option right now for the Colts to be potentially that bridge guy for the next guy for maybe the next couple seasons or something?
No, I think he is probably the best option. He goes to the Saints, throws 14 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 12 to 1,400 yards passing, and they go 5-2. I bet that if he didn't get hurt and he played the entire year, the Saints make the playoffs. They don't win the division, but I do think they sneak into the playoffs with how he looked. And he also didn't really have any weapons. Michael Thomas didn't play at all. Emmanuel Sanders is gone, Cook is gone. So he had Alvin Kamara, and that was about it to throw to. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I would argue with the Saints, because Michael Thomas is out, their receiving core is a lot worse than our receiving core. So if he's able to do that with nobody, I think if you put him on this team with a good coach like Frank Reich, with a really good offensive line, and I would hope another weapon to go along with Michael Pittman, whether that's a tight end or a receiver, I think his numbers would be much better at the 7 game mark. So I think he's the best. I think Mitch is a risk but could work because I really do think Chicago is the problem. Matt Nagy, he was not a good coach for him. And there's been some Bears fans that are like, hey, he needs a good coach. Give him a good coach. Give him a good offensive line, some people to throw to, and he might be able to do something. So I agree with you. Mitch is number one, or Jameis is number one, but Mitch is number two, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think you would do this knowing that these guys probably aren't your long-term solution at quarterback, either of these guys. So you might still either draft a quarterback this year, or maybe you trade up next year and you draft a quarterback, just kind of depending how it goes. I mean, I would personally be okay with that. The only question I think is like, is Jameis or Mitch going to want like a multi-year deal, like some, you're not going to sign him for 1 year and then, move on from him next year. Like they're going to maybe want some decent money. So are you going to have to get into a bidding war with maybe some of these really quarterback needy teams? There are a couple of them still. So are you going to have to get into that with maybe a few of these teams for their services? I personally would be okay with it just because you need a quarterback that has some experience. But I think that would be kind of the biggest question is, number one, what would it cost? And number two, where are they kind of at? Do they want just a team that's going to commit to them for 3, 4, 5 years? Or are they kind of like, hey, I want to go prove it somewhere for a year and then go get paid next off season or something like that?
Right. I think they are going to want to go somewhere where a team's going to be committed to them. And honestly, if we're going to go after them, I want us to be committed to them because they're not old, right? They still have some years left in them. If they come here and they play really, really good, why get rid of them? Just keep them. You can keep them on there. You got your guy. And then if you draft someone this year or next year, then hey, that's your backup. So if you end up getting like Desmond Ridder or Sam Howell as, the guy kind of sitting behind Jameis or Mitch, but Mitch and Jameis end up working out really well, then hey, you got those guys as a backup. That's a pretty good backup to have. So I say commit to them, give them some pieces to work with. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, hey, you can move on and then you can go after either somebody next year or, like I said, draft someone this year and let them take over.
I think if you did sign him, you'd have to kind of do what they did with Carson Wentz in a way where, you have the option to move on from them after a certain amount of time, right? You structure the contract in a way where you're really not going to eat a whole lot of dead cap after a year or two. I don't know what that would look like exactly, but I feel like you need to structure it in some way where, you could be locked into them long term, but you don't necessarily have to be if they aren't the guy and you need to go draft the guy next year, say, or something like that. So, but it's a very interesting conversation because I think both these guys have some upside. I would be intrigued to bring them in, but obviously at the right price and the right length and all that stuff. All right, let's move on now to offensive tackle. Now, this is a group that also not a whole lot there. The cupboard's pretty dry in terms of offensive tackles. You obviously have Teron Armstead, who is the, prize possession there at offensive tackle. Guys like Cam Robinson got tagged, so there's not a ton there. I know the Colts have been linked to potentially a guy in Dwayne Brown, which would be, he's a little bit older, but he'd probably be like another Band-Aid stopgap solution until you figure out and maybe next offseason go address left tackle, maybe early in the draft or in free agency. What are your thoughts on tackle for the Colts, potentially in free agency?
For me, I'm going after one of the like a Dwayne Brown type of player. Armstead would be great. You put him on there. Jonathan Taylor would love it. He would run for so much more, like get so many more yards. But I think Armstead's too much money. I know we have the money. We got $70 million to spend, but let's use that on receivers and playmakers or defensive players. And let's get a Dwayne Brown for 2 years, sign him for like $5 to $10 million a year, somewhere in there, whatever he's looking for. It's probably not going to be too much. And then draft your next left tackle, have them sit behind Dwayne Brown. So that's what I would do. Personally, if Cam Robinson was available, I say go after him because he's still pretty young. But yeah, I go Dwayne Brown.
Yeah, I mean, you almost have to at this point if you're going to address it free agency, get an older guy that's clearly not your future. You kind of have to, I feel like, at this point. So, yeah, I think this one you don't have to talk about a bunch because there's really not a ton of guys there that you'd even really kick the tires on, especially now with Eric Fisher presumably not coming back to Indianapolis. You kind of just have to, just kind of band-aid it, unfortunately, unless you do elect to go the draft route. Maybe you draft a guy early and then you're like, yep, we're good with him. And maybe they have a competition with like him. And if you re-sign Matt Pryor, I don't know. There's a lot of ways this left tackle position could go. But yeah, I certainly think if you go the free agency route, you probably need to go get a guy like Dwayne Brown. I agree with you. All right. Now let's move on to a position that maybe is a little bit more intriguing here. Let's talk about defensive end because we got to talk about defensive end, man. I mean, there's so many guys still available. You think Chandler Jones, you think Hassan Reddick. Those are a couple names to just come immediately to mind. Those are kind of the top two guys. And there's a ton more guys here. What are your thoughts on this edge class here in free agency?
I think it's good. Definitely better than quarterback for sure. To me, you got to go after Chandler Jones or Reddick. Yeah, you got to try to get one of those guys. I know there's other guys available too. That wouldn't cost as much money, but Chandler Jones is still a guy that can get you around 10 sacks a year when he's healthy. And then Hassan Reddick, he's in his mid to late 20s now. So if you get Reddick, you can have him for another 5 to 10 years if you decide to re-sign him. I think you only need one guy personally, unless you get another guy for like depth reasons. I'm a firm believer that Kwity Paye is going to have a really big year this upcoming season, and I think Dio is going to have a big year as well. And then I think you got to bring back Kamoko Toure and Taekwon Lewis. I mean, Kamoko Toure played 40% of the snaps and was like second on the team in sacks.
Yeah,
So
he was very underused. Yeah, for sure. I just think you need a guy. Like you need a dog on that other side beside Kwity Paye. Because I mean, you talk like they talk about it all the time. Like they are very well aware that they are very lacking in the pass rush department last season. And I think they realize that we need to probably go get a guy. We really need to upgrade there because it drives the whole engine of this defense, right? Like if you can't consistently get pressure on the quarterback, we're going to see what's happened to the Colts down the stretch. Like that end of the year Jacksonville drive where Trevor Lawrence is virtually perfect, for the entire game. You just let him go right down the field. This offense, that's one of the worst offenses in the league. Why do you do that? Because you can't get any pressure on the quarterback, right? So yeah, I mean, I think those two guys are certainly a few guys. There's some other guys that are of interest, I suppose. Dante Fowler is a guy that's kind of interesting to me because he's only 27 years old.
Yeah.
Former high round pick of the Jacksonville Jaguars a number of years ago. Matt, I know you threw out Emmanuel Ogba's name, Miami defensive end. He's 28 years old, so a little bit older, but not old. What are your thoughts on him? Maybe
I like him. He's a very productive player. He's not going to cost a whole lot of money. So if you end up missing out on like Chandler Jones or Hassan Reddick, then I think somebody like Ogba could be a good next man up. You get somebody in there who has an experience, who could maybe teach Kwity and Dio or whoever else we bring back in, like Kamoko or Taekwon Lewis. He can teach them some stuff and make them better. So that's mostly what I'm looking for anyway. It's just guys that can step in, help our young guys, kind of get them to where they need to be, help the coaches out with that. So, I mean, I'd be for Ogba. He's like my third, or fourth, tight end, defensive end on the list.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's like a couple guys that really stand out, and then there's some guys that they're solid. They're nothing special. I think he's probably right there in that, right there in that department, I would say. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly some guys, you're right, that I think the Colts, if they got one of these guys, they got a Chandler Jones or Hassan Reddick, those two guys especially, like that would that would boost your pass rush to a different level that it's never been really since Robert Mathis retired.
Yeah.
if the Colts are serious about wanting to get better at pass rush,
Yeah.
you probably need to invest a little bit of dollar
Yeah.
into it.
I'll
Especially with
tell
these
you
guys in
what.
the market.
I think out of any position, he's going to spend the most money on defensive end. I
I hope
think that's
so.
what Ballard's going to do because this whole class of rookies for receivers is loaded with fast guys that can create separation, and that's what Ballard wants to go after. So if you can't get a like a Kirk, who shouldn't cost much anyway, or somebody like that, he can go to the draft. So I think he's going to put most of the money into defensive end and make sure he can get a Chandler Jones or a Reddick. I think he's probably going to go after Jones before Reddick, if I had to guess. That seems more like what Ballard would do. But yeah, I expect him to invest big into defensive end.
It's interesting because you really lost a lot of your veteran leadership last offseason when you let Houston and Autry walk. So maybe this is kind of like we messed up. We need to bring back in more veterans. I mean, that's what Ballard, he has admitted before in the past.
Mm-hmm.
When the Colts have let veterans go sometimes, there seems like there's some lack of accountability that's happened on this defense, especially. So I wonder if they bring in a guy like Jones, he's the guy he's going to hold people accountable. He's an all-pro type of guy. So that would set such a tone in your defensive line room. I mean, you kind of look at it though, honestly, Matt. You look at every single level of this defense, and you could honestly make an argument. Safety is a little bit up in the air because of the Julian Blackmon injury, but cornerback, you got Kenny Moore, who's a Pro Bowler. Linebacker, you got Darius Leonard, who's an All-Pro. In interior defensive line, you have DeForest Buckner, who's an All-Pro Pro Bowl player. Defensive end, not really at this point,
Right.
So it'd make a lot of sense to get a player of that caliber on your defense. I honestly think that is the missing piece. If you can get a guy that can get consistent pressure on the quarterback from the edge room and give Kwity Paye more one-on-one opportunities and Buckner more one-on-one opportunities and the rest of these young defensive linemen just more chances, and that guy can command more double teams, it's going to help everybody. That. And honestly, if you address it and you go all out for one of these top defensive ends, I really don't feel like you need to do a lot of fine-tuning the rest of the offseason on this defense. Seriously.
I don't think so either.
Maybe you add another corner. Maybe you add a little bit more safety depth.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I mean, you're sitting pretty good. You feel good about your defensive interior. You have some young guys on your defensive line. You just don't have the guy right now.
Right.
You don't have the alpha on your defensive line. I don't feel like you do. Maybe Kwity gets to that point at some point, but currently right now on your roster, you do not.
Yeah.
So if you can do that, Matt, I feel like that can also just help you just really go all in on this passing offense. Go all in on this offense that really struggled at times down the stretch. You can go address tackle. You can go address wide receiver. You can go address tight end. You can go address quarterback. You can do all these things with all the money you're going to have left over from free agency and in the draft. I mean, you still have a lot of picks now in this draft, adding another third rounder and an earlier second rounder. So you can really go address these other positions. But yeah, I think you have to invest just one big splash signing at defensive end. And if you can do that, I feel really good about where this defense is at.
I do too. And the corners, Xavier Rhodes, he was hurt, he dealt with some stuff, so he didn't play as well as he could have. But Isaiah Rodgers, Kenny Moore, Rocky Sin, outside of the last game, they all played really well. And there wasn't a whole lot of help with the defensive line for them. So if you add a Chandler Jones, it's going to make their job a lot easier.
Yeah, and if you add, I know the Colts have been linked to Casey Hayward, just another vet like that's still really good. I mean, you're set at defense. You really are set at defense. And this is the first time I think that I would be able to actually say that on defense. Even last offseason, I would have said, well, you got questions at corner, you got questions at defensive end. But now, if you were able to address that, even questions at middle linebacker last offseason.
Yeah.
But now I feel like you know who your linebackers are. You know who your three corners, probably your three starters are. Got questions about Blackmon's injury, but as a player, you don't have questions. You feel good where you're at, for this most part on this defense. So, yeah, I mean, I think defensive end has to be number one priority. I really do, especially in free agency. So, all right. Well, you talked about wide receiver. I figure we could talk about it too, because this class a couple weeks ago looked a lot better than it does now. Now, there still are a lot of good names here on this market, right? There still is the Allen Robinson that's out there. There still are some other guys, like DJ Chark's a name that's been linked to the Colts as well. You have guys like Christian Kirk, who you mentioned as well at wide receiver, and I'm sure I'm missing some names of some other guys as well. But you still have a few guys that you kind of like and you think would really help elevate your offense to another level. I think the question and the uncertainty at quarterback right now is certainly a big deal. But
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on these wide receivers right now?
Like you said, it was much better like a week or two ago. But now, I mean, I think it's still good. I would bring Ty back. Get that veteran leadership in there. They all really love Ty and look up to him. I don't think he's going to ask for a ton of money. I think we can get him pretty cheap. So I'm bringing Ty back personally. He got $70 million. He's not going to be here probably past this season. Why not? Sign him because it's not going to affect next year's cap. So I bring him back for a couple million, and then I like Allen Robinson. That's another big body you can have on the other side with Michael Pittman out there. So I would definitely bring him in. I don't think he's going to cost nearly as much as he would have last year because he didn't get as many touches and he wasn't as involved. And if you have Mitch Trubisky, there's that connection. And Allen Robinson played some of, if not his best years, with Mitch Trubisky. So there's that as well. And then kind of looking at the others, I like Jamison Crowder. Um, you know, I I feel like I might be alone on it. I like Juju. I feel like Juju could be a good slot receiver. That guy that can create separation. So you have him, Michael Pittman, maybe an Allen Robinson if you want to spend money with the receivers. I think all three of them could have really good years because, like, who are you going to double team at that point? And
Right.
when Juju's not double teamed and he's not the main focus, he can put up 1,500 yards. So I'd be cool with somebody like him, even if we just get him and get a rookie. And then looking at some of the guys that aren't like big name receivers, Brian Pringle, former Kansas City guy, fast. That's another guy that can create some separation. I'd bring him in. Christian Kirk is another guy. Um, if they don't bring him back, Odell Beckham Jr. We could probably get him for a pretty good price, but he might command some more money. So that's a maybe. And then, like I said, DJ Chark. But yeah, those are guys I'm looking at. I know I listed quite a bit, but there's some pretty good receivers that are going to be available.
My question with Juju is where is his head at? Like, is he going to continue to be like, if the Colts were to sign him, is he going to be a distraction for this team? If he is, I'm staying away from that
Yeah.
with a 30-foot pole, But if he has matured, I don't know if he has, but if he has, I mean, the talent is there, right? He was one of
Yeah.
the better receivers a couple of years ago. So I would still have my hesitations on him at this point. But I think kind of where I would be, Matt, with this
Mhm.
wide receiver room, I feel like Allen Robinson's going to just command a ton of attention because he's the top guy in this class right now.
Right.
But I would not mind like a Christian Kirk, for example.
Mhm.
I know he's probably never going to be maybe a one. I mean, maybe he will. He's still fairly young. You never know.
Yeah.
But he's got talent, right? And so
Yeah.
if you pair him alongside a Pittman, maybe you bring back Ty. I'm bringing back Ty only
Mhm.
under the stipulation that number one, he's only getting a couple million.
Yeah.
Number two, he's probably not even my number three. He might be my number four because he's just so
Right.
with his health and with his, the size of him and all that stuff. He's getting a little bit more fragile with his age. So I would just keep him. If he's your number four, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
And then I'd go draft a guy probably, honestly. I would go draft a guy maybe in that second round, depending what you do. I think it's all going to depend on, first off, how you address quarterback.
Mhm.
If you address it in free agency, do you go draft the guy there, or maybe you go draft a left tackle?
Yeah.
But I personally wouldn't mind, especially with how good this wide receiver class is in the draft, to go draft a guy in the second round and sign a guy in free agency. Then you feel like
Right.
you've really addressed it all
Yeah.
the way, and you don't really have to worry about it because. I mean, I feel good about paying Christian Kirk a decent amount of money, not eye-popping or overwhelming. But like, I feel good, like he has some upside if I can get a good quarterback in there to get him the ball. Whoever my quarterback is, I'm going to give him weapons. Whether it's say you talk about Jameis, like you signed Jameis for a year or a couple of years here, you give him weapons. He turned out to be your guy. Great, you figured out multiple positions there. Or if he's not your guy, and you go draft a guy either this year or next year, that quarterback's going to have some really good weapons to throw to. And that's just only going to help his, development down the road. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I see
And
nothing but win-win here if you sign a guy and draft a guy. That's personally my philosophy on how I feel like they should address it. I feel like they need to address it at least twice at wide
yeah.
receiver, because it's just the cupboard was so bare last year
Mhm.
with wide receiver, especially
And
with the TY injury. And
yeah.
there is a question of how much of a factor was just Carson Wentz
Mhm.
versus the wide receivers. I think that's a valid argument as well. So that's why I'm not opposed to bringing back TY,
Yeah.
because he was open at, when he was healthy. He got open. He
Right.
still has it, I believe. So, yeah, wide receiver is an interesting one, though, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of guys that could really help elevate this team
Yeah.
here. And I'm excited for that, man.
Me too. And what I'll say, if they decide, they're going to get somebody in the draft that's not a quarterback, they're going to have their first pick be a receiver. You got 2 third-round picks. If a guy like Chris
Right.
Olave falls to like 18, 19, I would try to trade your second round pick and add a third round pick. The one you got from Washington would probably be easier to do this with, and try to trade up closer to 20 and see if you can get a guy like Chris Olave. Because if you can get him in there with how good he is at route running, he's a really, really good slot receiver. If he falls to like 20, I think you got to do that. If not, then fine, keep your draft picks, get one of the other guys that are going to fall to second round. And then with Juju, I think a lot of people were really criticizing him because of the whole TikTok thing that he was on. He was making videos on the field. But I mean, we're at a point now where most NFL players that are like 25 or younger, they're on TikTok now. They have their YouTube channels and they're doing, things like this. Maybe not as much as what Juju did, but as far as like a headspace, he seems perfectly fine to me. The only thing I would be a little concerned with is he was hurt this past season. Is that injury going to affect him this upcoming season or no? That'd be it. But honestly, if Allen Robinson's gone and you got Juju out there, I get him. I think him and Michael Pittman together would be really good, and they can make TikToks together.
Oh, boy. Bro, I know that's going to trigger some people. I
Oh,
can't
I
wait.
kind of I know it would trigger Derek. So
Derek would be like,
just
no.
you get there before the
Absolutely not.
game, and he's on the 50-yard line doing TikToks. Oh, but you would have
Oh,
Blue doing
boy.
it with him. So
Oh, of course. Yeah,
yeah, Blue will
absolutely.
do it with him.
Yeah, Blue will do it with
Yeah.
him, right? Blue's crazy. I
Oh
love
yeah.
Blue. But one last thing I want to talk about here, we're sticking with some weapons for the quarterback, tight
Mhm.
end as well. Now, similar to wide receiver, tight end's a little bit less of a talented position in free agency now with,
Yeah.
A couple guys, some of the top names there getting franchise tagged and getting brought back and all that stuff. But there are still a couple guys that are of interest as well. I want to pull that up real fast. I mean, you got Zach Ertz, who, I think if Carson Wentz was still on the roster, I'd certainly say yes,
Yeah.
100%. He's still fairly talented. Like, he's a good tight end. He's 31 years old.
Yeah.
My question with that is, Matt, okay, like, is this just another Band-Aid solution for tight end? I don't know,
Right.
because he's only 31, so it's kind of like he still could be there and be productive for another couple
Mhm.
years. But is there another name here in free agency potentially that could be a little bit younger and could potentially be your tight end for a little bit longer than Zach Ertz? What are your thoughts on him?
I like Zach Ertz. A little older, like you said. He's still productive. He can still get the job done. There is a little bit of a connection there with him and Frank Reich. So I guess there's that, even though it's been like years since they've been together.
Yeah.
But looking at the tight end group, there's not a whole lot of names out there that I would go crazy for.
Right.
Um, I do think the top guy I would go for, who I think is going to be available, is CJ Uzma.
Yeah.
CJ is going to be available because you remember Rob Gronkowski came out and said, if I didn't play with Brady, I would like to play with Joe Burrow.
Hmm.
So I think he's probably going to Cincinnati, and then CJ Uzma is going to be available. He has a market value. I think it's estimated to be $8 million.
Okay.
Very good for, I guess, what he's valued at. Very productive. There were some games I watched with Cincinnati when he had the ball thrown to him. He was catching it every single time. He was doing good routes. I'm not sure how good of a run blocker he is, but honestly, I'd bring him in and I'd bring Mo back. That's what I would
Yeah.
do.
I think bringing back Mo is a must. Like, you have to bring back Mo at
Yeah.
this point with Jack retiring. One name that's very interesting to me that I think is such an underrated tight end that nobody talks about
Mhm.
is Gerald Everett. I am
Yeah,
intrigued by Gerald Everett. I've been
I
intrigued
like
by
him.
Gerald Everett for a couple seasons now. I mean, he's still 27 years old.
Mhm.
I feel like he has a lot of upside, and with the Russell Wilson injury, he didn't necessarily get to put his full, ability on display playing with
Yep.
Geno Smith. But I mean, last year he still had 650 yards, right?
Yeah.
He's still, or I'm sorry, he's last year he still had, nearly 500 yards
Okay.
receiving and, playing with, multiple quarterbacks throughout the season
Mhm.
and, guys like DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett as their number 1 and 2 options there. He was still a consistent tight end. Maybe he's not like that crazy, over the top, like amazing tight end, but I always feel like he's a solid tight end. It has a lot of upside in terms of receiving,
Mhm.
which is exactly what the Colts need from their
Yeah.
tight ends right now. I would not be opposed to him, and also Robert Tonyan
Yeah.
is another name as
That's who I
well.
was gonna mention too.
Yeah, he's still fairly young too. I think he's 27, 28 years old.
Yep.
So he's right in that range as well. My question is, okay, is it the Aaron Rodgers effect or is Tonyan actually a good tight end? And that
Right.
injury, those would be my biggest hesitations. What are your thoughts on Tonyan though?
I like him. Honestly, just kinda looking at who's available right now as far as new players, like I said, Uzomah's my number 1 guy, and then at number 2 would probably be Robert Tonyan as far as, like, who's available because they're both still young. They're both still very productive and very good. I mean, you could sign everybody's favorite tight end, Eric Ebron, if you want, but I'm afraid that if we bring him in here, he's gonna drop the pen that he's signing his deal with, so,
Oh boy.
he might not be a good option. I mean, Jerry Cook's an older guy, so if you
Mhm.
wanna get him, there's that. OJ Howard's another, but
OJ
yeah,
Howard. Yeah.
I like
Um,
him.
it's interesting with OJ Howard because you do wonder with him, like he's physically, obviously, he's a top pick for a reason, right? Like
Yep.
he's got a lot of physical talent. Him and also Evan Ingram, both former very high picks in the draft.
Mhm.
And guys that really haven't worked out. I personally would like Evan Ingram probably a little bit more than OJ Howard because Evan Ingram's actually like had a good season before,
Right. Yeah,
Um,
he made the Pro
but
Bowl. I mean, he dropped
yeah,
a lot of balls, but he made the Pro Bowl.
yeah.
Um, so there's that, but no, I mean, I don't mind Evan Ingram. I wouldn't pay much for him though, just
Mhm.
because there is the, dropping issue that he had. It might have gotten better, but I remember he was selected to the Pro Bowl, and he had, like, 100 drops or something crazy,
Jeez.
which blew me away, but I mean, I'd be okay with him. I mean, I doubt he's going back to New York, so you can kinda and I don't think he's gonna command a lot of attention right away. I think some of these other
Right.
guys are gonna have more attention, so if you can't get, like, a CJ Uzomah, a Robert Tonyan, Rob Gronkowski, or, whoever, Zach Ertz, then you could look at a guy like him, and, maybe you can pick up Evan Ingram.
See, he is so intriguing to me because let's face it, when you look at the New York passing game and what the offense they've been trying to run, I mean,
Yeah,
dumpster fire comes to mind. Like it's
it's
been
true.
bad for years. I mean, for years with Evan Ingram there. So you're like, he's still like, I know he hasn't been fantastic at all,
Right.
but he still has, I mean, 2 seasons over 600 yards,
Mhm.
right? And I know like people had some questions about the injury, but he's played in 16 and 15 games back to back years.
Mhm.
So he's become a little bit more durable at tight end as well.
Yeah.
And I know that receiving touchdowns haven't necessarily been something that's been like, oh my goodness. But like he's been playing with Daniel Jones, man.
True. Yeah,
So
that's true.
how much? I mean, he's been playing with through a couple regimes at this point. Like,
Yeah.
how much do you place that on Evan Ingram? I mean, he certainly deserves some of the blame, but
Mhm.
how much do you place that on him versus just like the Giants' offense has been in shambles for like a half a decade at this point.
Yeah.
So I would be interested. I think he could potentially be a low risk, high reward type of guy, kind of like maybe an Eric Ebron was in a way,
Yeah.
where if you get him with the right quarterback, he could potentially, pop off.
Mhm.
Honestly, he's a flawed player for sure, but the upside could be tremendous, especially in the vertical passing game, which the Colts desperately need at tight end right now with Jack Doyle retiring. He never was that kind of guy. But
Mhm.
you have Granson. If you had Granson and he kind of emerges here, and your number two gets a little bit more snaps, and
Yep.
then you also have a guy like Evan Ingram. I mean, your vertical passing game and depending who your quarterback is, obviously, could
Yeah,
go really well. It could really
definitely.
help out a lot. So, yeah.
Yeah, say I definitely agree with that. You know, I guess I wouldn't be upset with Evan Ingram. He's kind of a little lower on who I want, but if we end up getting him, then I think it might work. Because like you said, Daniel Jones was there, and I mean, yeah, I feel bad for anybody who plays with Daniel Jones at this point. But no, I mean, maybe you get a good quarterback in there, um, and maybe he does something pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. Obviously, there's a lot of names that could be like low risk, high reward type of signings. The Colts
Yeah,
are obviously going to have to figure out, okay, which positions are we comfortable paying a little bit more to, a la defensive end, hopefully,
yeah,
versus which positions maybe we're not going to pay as much to in free agency. Maybe tight end would be one of those where you still probably need to sign a
right.
guy. I mean, you definitely do.
Yeah, yeah,
But like, is it a guy that's not going to be like one of the top free agents necessarily? But a guy that you feel like could fit well and integrate well into what your offense wants to do. We
uh
shall see, man. It's going to be an interesting couple weeks here in free agency. Like we said at the beginning, hopefully the Colts actually decide to do something. They have the
yes,
most cap space in the NFL, so people can't say, you don't have any cap space to sign players. Yes, we do.
yeah,
We do have cap space, and we need to do that,
mhm,
because we have a good base, of a good core of guys that we've brought in, right? We have a
mhm,
lot of good guys that we really like. What we don't have at the key positions, quarterback, left tackle, defensive end, even wide receiver and tight end. We
yeah,
don't have, outside of maybe Pittman, any guys there that
mhm,
really push the needle for the Colts. Like we don't. And that's an issue. And you
right,
can honestly solve at least a couple of these positions in free agency if you decide to not just sit on your money there.
right.
I really believe that. So I hope they do, man. I really
Me
hope they
too.
do.
Say I'm hoping that we get up on Monday. I think noon is when legal tampering begins. So I'm hoping from noon to 5 o'clock we see you know some agreed the terms type of things involving Indianapolis and some bigger name free agents. Not like we have agreed the terms with Scotty Barnes, safety. You know, I
Or
don't want to see
kicker,
that. Or
or
kicker, yeah.
okay, the cornerbacks on the day that Russell Wilson gets traded. That
Yeah.
was a bad idea.
That I look, I mean that guy is pretty good. He's fast. So I think that's a good depth piece. But yeah, that could have waited a day.
Well, yeah, watch that guy turns out to be an all pro and everybody's
Yeah.
just crapping on it because the Russell Wilson news. That'd be
Yeah.
funny.
That would be. Uh, he goes in,
Yeah.
dominates.
Yeah, exactly. He's another Kenny Moore 2.0. All right, guys. Well, that'll do it for our look at free agency coming up here very soon. Let us know what you guys think on some of these players. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Really appreciate all your support. As always, guys, go Colts.